Hey everybody, it's Claudia from Create with Claudia. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I'm doing something just a little bit different. This was a project that I worked on, and you saw in the title that I'm going to be telling you the 10 things I learned while making my first and probably last quilt coat. I usually do a lot of how-tos, I do a lot of tutorials, that sort of thing, free patterns. And I don't normally do this, but I really wanted to tell you what I learned when I made this coat. Well, actually, if you can see, it's a vest. So that tells you a little something of how the process went. Before I get into my list of the 10 things, I do want to tell you just a little bit about my process and how I go about doing projects and learning new things. And the reason I wanted to do a quilt coat, if you go on social media right now, they are all the rage. They are in stores. They are at awards shows. They are the most gorgeous things, and I have seen so many beautiful, beautiful versions of quilt coats. And as I've been quilting for 30 plus years, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. I thought, I want my own quilt coat, and I don't feel like going to the store to buy one for a lot of money. That being said, one of the most important things you should know about me is I don't sew clothes. I don't know how to sew clothes. I don't know how to read sewing patterns, that sort of thing. I have quilted for 30 plus years. I can read a quilting pattern like nobody's business. I can make a quilt, no problem. But clothing is a whole different animal, and I find it really difficult. And I guess I've never really taken the time to learn it. And so it was tricky. I've done 2 other projects. Both of them are no longer here. I tried to make a skirt about 5 or 6 years ago. Totally lopsided. I didn't know how to hem it. The zipper was all weird. The waistline was wrong. It went in the trash. And then I said, okay, never again. I'm never sewing clothing again. About 3 years later, I decided I saw a really pretty blouse pattern. So I said, oh, that can't be that hard. It's just a tunic blouse. I got about halfway through, and it was in the trash too. It's just something that's, no matter how many tutorials I read online, it's really tricky for me. That leads me to another thing of sort of my thought process going into this. I like to teach myself things. And I figure if I can't teach myself how to do it, then I'm not going to learn it, which is totally wrong, I know, but it's just my thought process, and I do it with everything, and I'm kind of stubborn about it. You can ask my family about that. And one other thing that you should know about me is I'm also very impatient. You can also ask my family about that, especially my teenage daughter. I need to learn to slow down and have more patience, and you'll see that you need that with this project. So now that I've told you sort of some of my faults, I have many more, but some of my sewing faults, let me tell you a little bit about this jacket, which I actually absolutely love the look, the fabric that I used. I was a 2021 Island Batik ambassador, and I had a lot of scraps left over from lots and lots of projects that we've done throughout the year. And I really fell in love with those rich autumnal tones that they had. And you can see I used all 2.5-inch strips for this. And I'll explain why later. Let me just show you the inside really quickly too. There you can see the lining a little bit. So now I'm going to get into the 10 things I learned when I made this coat and why I probably won't make another one. Number 1, have some minimal sewing knowledge. And I don't mean simple straight line sewing, I mean sewing clothes. When I opened up my pattern, I looked at it and I said, oh, this looks pretty easy. I can do this. You need to have some knowledge of sewing clothes. It could be beginner, it could be intermediate, could be expert, whatever it is, but just have some knowledge of how to read a pattern. Number 2, pick out the right pattern. Now, I looked all around at different patterns. I was at a fabric store, and they had some at a craft store that also has patterns. And I found one, I picked it out. It was for beginner sewers. I said, well, how can I go wrong with a beginning sewing pattern? It was a cute jacket. It was beginner again, but it was for knit fabric. And I did not pay attention to that. And if you sew anything, quilts, clothing, whatever, you know that knit fabric is completely different than layered quilted batik fabric. So definitely pick out the right pattern. And number 3, measure, remeasure, and remeasure again, and check the measurements on the pattern. I just looked at the size, sort of they have different sizes, and I said, well, that's my size, that should do it. I didn't look at the measurements, and again, that all goes back to knowing how to, I think, read a sewing pattern and that sort of thing. because I did not realize how small this was going to be on me. And again, that's why there are no sleeves on there, as you can see. This was supposed to be like a cardigan. This is supposed to look like a cardigan. It's supposed to have lapels, a button, and 2 long sleeves. Number 4 is read some quilt coat how-tos. There are a load of articles out there, and they're all really helpful, some more than others, but read them and take the time to read them. And this goes back to me liking to teach myself things and not having patience. I sort of skimmed a couple before I started, but I was like, oh yeah, I think I got this, no problem. And I was wrong. That was a good lesson learned. To definitely read from the experts some good how-tos. Number 5, have patience. I did not when I made this. I said, well, look, I'm just going to zip, 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 sew down the seams. How hard could it be? And I ended up rushing through it a lot. And then I would go and reread the directions, and I realized I had sewn something wrong. There are a lot of pulled threads in here, a lot of angry seam ripper moments, that sort of thing. So I highly recommend when you go into this, it's not going to take an afternoon or a day or two. It does take a while to make a quilt coat, and especially if you're not used to what you're doing. Number 6, ensure to yourself that you want to cut up one of your quilts. I know some people cut up old quilts. Maybe they have quilts they don't want anymore. It's just my suggestion, and this is why actually I made quilted fabric for mine. No way was I going to cut up one of my quilts that I made for a jacket, and I don't know if maybe subliminally that was telling me that something was going to go wrong with this whole process. So just really ensure that you want to cut up that quilt. That's just a piece of advice for me, and I am really glad that I made my own fabric, because I would have been heartbroken if I had tried this with a quilt that I had already done. So for me, this was the best solution. Number 7 is really important, and I did not even consider this. Remember that the fabric you're using is quilted, so it actually has like 3 layers. You have the bottom, the batting, the lining or the back of the quilt. You have the batting, and then you have the stripes or the fabric on the top. So you're basically sewing through 3 layers, and that makes a huge difference, I think, in size and also bulk and all of the seams and things like that. You should see some of the seams, especially the pockets. The pattern called for them turning them under 2 times. Well, I've got this rock hard ridge around all of the things. It took me forever. I think I even broke a needle sewing one of them. So keep in mind that you're sewing through quilted fabric, and that goes back to, making sure you're using the right pattern and that sort of thing. Number 8, and this was a tip in, I believe it was an article by Susie Quilts on how to make a quilt coat, and she suggested making a muslin pattern sample. And I thought, well, I really don't have time to do that. That goes back to my patience problem. I said, nope, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to sew it. Big mistake. Had I done that, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. I would have not made this jacket. And so I really wish I had done a muslin sample first. Number 9, consider the type of fabric or the patterns of the fabric you're using or the quilt that you're going to be using. In my case, let me find a bigger piece here. I used, as you can see, directional fabric, the stripes. I did not even consider that as being a problem, and you really do have to think about that. It takes up actually a lot more fabric to use a directional pattern on sewing clothing. And I had heard that in the back of my head, but I never really thought about it. So I ended up having to actually add on to this quilt a little bit to make sure I had enough fabric. That being said, if you're using the quilt maybe with stars, just make sure when you're cutting out your pieces and things like that, that those stars are placed where you want them to be placed. Sometimes they're, maybe not in the right place, or you don't like where they end up being. With the stripes, it was a little bit nicer. It was just straight up and down. But like at the seams and things, that was a little tricky. And number 10 is, it is not as easy as you think. Again, I've quilted for 30 plus years. I can make a quilt, no problem. I can barely hem a pair of pants, and I should have known that this would not be that easy to make. And as you can see, there are no sleeves on it. There's no lapel. There's no button. By the time I went to the sleeves, and they weren't even close to fitting me, and they were really narrow. I don't know if I miscut everything. I'm just not sure what happened. But I still have a vest. I'm not sure if I'm going to wear it again. I'm posting some pictures of it. I'm not going to put it on for you right now. It does fit, maybe over a black dress or something. It might be an interesting piece. I I was thinking I might redo the sleeves a little bit because they stick out a little bit, as you can probably see in the pictures. So all of that being said, I don't want to discourage you from making a quilt coat. If you know what you're doing and you sort of take a few things into consideration, the sky is the limit, and they are so beautiful. And I think I have a quilt coat envy now. I just love all of the quilt coats out there. And who knows, maybe in a couple of years when this, when the disappointment of this one has sort of died down, maybe I'll try it again, and maybe I'll take a clothing sewing lesson. That might help me too. So I hope you learned a little bit from this video. It's a little bit of a confessional. I did want to show you my quilt vest or quilt coat, and I did want to tell you all of the things I learned from my experience. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you've ever made a quilt coat, I'd love to. If you're over on social media, make sure you post a picture on my, or tag me on Instagram, Create with Claudia. I'd love to see your quilt coats. Like I said, I'm just amazed by all of the ones out there. But I'd love to hear from you. I love getting comments from people. And make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell. That way you get notified every time I do a tutorial or tips, a free pattern, that sort of thing, or even a confessional like this. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.